Take it back. I want ignorance again. What is the limit of human comprehension? How much can the abyss stare back at you before you flinch? This is one of the many open questions explored in a cosmic horror debut by fellow indie author J.A.J. Minton. Let's get Discovery Undone. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Books Undone. I'm your host, Livia J. Elliot, and today we have another author spotlight. I have with me debut indie author J.A.J. Minton, but they can be better described as a creative family. This is actually the pen name of John, Amy, and Jacob. I am super excited to have you all here with me. Will you introduce yourselves to my listeners?
We are thrilled to be here, Livia. My name is John Minton.
And I'm Amy Minton.
And my name is Jacob Minton. I am their son, just to put that out. I'm the youngest of the creative family.
Well, you want to make sure everyone knows we're old?
Yeah,
What
that
was
was
that?
exactly why. Yeah.
Well, that was just uncalled
I didn't
for.
totally want to be associated with you 100%.
I see that. I see that.
And we just want to say, I think this is our first podcast together.
Yeah,
so
it
we're
is.
very
So
excited.
Thank you for having us, Livia.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you for answering my call and everything. I know we had like time zone issues, the perks of being in Australia, you know?
Right.
I mean, the internet's amazing. We get to get together and talk, even though we're at opposite ends of the world. It's pretty cool.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
Literally. Yeah, it's amazing. So, before we get started, let me tackle the usual disclaimers and share how this episode will be organized. The first half will be a spoiler light, and we will focus on questions around writing and collaborating and what it means to co write a book. Although the questions will be related to the craft, we will chat in the context of their debut book, Discovery. The second half will focus on discussing some of the many themes of the book, and thus it may contain some spoilers. Let me get started with a basic question. How did you decide to write the book together?
I don't know that we ever made the decision all right, we're doing this now. I came out of college with this pilot script. I took a television script writing class and had this idea for a TV show that I wanted to write for the class. And I came out of the class with this script for the first episode of the TV series. And I don't think my professor was crazy about it. So I brought it to my parents and said, how bad is it? Is it horrible? Is it not bad? Is it okay? I just want to, 'cause I trust your opinion to give me an honest gauge. And they said, no, there's something here. I kind of like this. And my dad, the way that he is kind of attached to the big cosmic ideas, and the way that my mom is, she found a character that she really liked and started fleshing out the world from there. But I don't think we ever made the agreement we're going to work on this together. It just kind of happened that I think we were all really excited about it, and it grew into something that each of us can have our own piece of and attach our names to, and it just became really fun to work on from there.
It sounds like we just took over your project, which
Yeah.
we kind of did.
It does sound like that, the way I said it,
Yeah.
doesn't it?
And we definitely did that.
But it's become something completely unrecognizable from what it was before. I mean, I love that not to make it sound like you completely commandeered it, but it became something that was ours and not mine,
Yeah.
if that makes sense.
It does to me. We say all the time, what we ended up with is something a little bit different than any of the one of us
Yeah.
could have done.
Yeah.
So.
Oh, yeah. 100%.
And what is the part that you started? What was the original script? Did it end up in the book?
It will later. Here's the problem that we ran into is that I came out with the script from school, and we were fleshing things out and having a lot of fun. And well, if this happens, wouldn't that mean that the world works this way? And we started world building from there. I started with the Arlifs, and we had to come up with a reason for why the Arlifs would exist if there were such a simulation. So we came up with the Manny DeMartini discovery scene and the collapse after that. But we wrote a draft of that and realized it was so incredibly complicated and hard to follow that this cannot be book one. The like 50% of this book is just backstory. So we went back and wrote it again, deciding that must be book two. Let's write book one. The new draft was still so complicated, filled with backstory, that we decided, okay, this is book two. Let's go back and write book. So the original idea I had is now book three.
Interesting. Now I'm more piked. You have to write book two now.
Yeah. We're in the process, and
We're working on it.
for listeners who don't know what the RLIFs are, they were the artificial life forms. And John's contribution to that was that when Jacob was writing it, he said, they're in a computer simulation. Kind of blew all of our minds. And we said, oh, I wonder why. And then we saw everything that we asked together as a family. I wonder why. It started with a little bit of curiosity about the world he created, why things would be there. And then after that, we started joking.
Yeah.
Just trying to make each other laugh as a family about like, what about the people running the simulation? And what if somebody's on a coffee break? We started to bring the humanity into it. And then with Manny DiMartini, we were just cracking each other up, trying to explain to Jacob who Geraldo Rivera was. Well, I mean, he still is, but what the kind of television stunts that he did with the discovery of Titanic riches and Al Capone's vault.
Yeah.
About, just like, it's just a former television, say, producer or
Personality.
Yeah. Former television personality who was just trying to get back into the mainstream game by monopolizing on some pop culture Titanic references and Al Capone references, because mob movies were really popular at the time. And of course, Manny is a very extreme version of what Geraldo did. But we were trying to explain to Jacob like that phenomenon in television that happened at that time, and he was just mystified by it. Like, you're kidding. And then it was, and
they put that on.
They put that on, yes. And it was like, and we watched it. We've stayed up late for it back when there was appointment television. And then it was John that said, what if he accidentally discovered Cthulhu? And we're just like, boom, the whole book took off.
Yeah.
It was just all three of us, right?
Yeah. It was a lot of us just trying to entertain each other.
Yeah.
I think that's where most of it came.
If we set aside the time to come up with a formula, I think the formula would have been, oh, that's interesting. Well, wouldn't it be funny?
Yeah.
That is most of the creative work, right? Asking where you can take something in terms of direction. But once you had that idea, how did you divide the work? Did each of you focus on a specific characters? Was it more around tasks? Because I know that you did a lot of research to put into the book, not only because you have a very diverse cast that is very accurate to everything that they say and the culture. There were some things that I found very specific and nuanced. It showcases the research, but was that, or perhaps one of you wrote, another one edited? How did that work?
Kind of all the above. As we just were trying to entertain each other, we kind of started to decide and discover what each of our strengths were. In the beginning, Amy and Jacob, he had not found a job yet out of school. So they would set up desks in an office and work an 8-hour day writing things back and forth and fleshing things out. And then we discovered, they would have, I knew a lot more of we were springboarding off of like Lovecraftian ideals and lore, and I knew a lot more of that, so they might get stuck about how something would work, and then they'd ask me how that goes. So it's like, just as we went along, I think we finally achieved particular roles that we were good at, that we could bring something. Like mine was kind of the 30,000 foot view and plotting and getting us out of corners when we were stuck with the lore. And then while you guys say what you...
Well, at first, I was putting Jacob through a master's program in writing. I would assign him books to read, and we would talk about how certain literary devices were used in those books. And maybe I would assign something, take a look at this paragraph and see how free and direct discourse works. And then he got better than me awfully quickly. Like when you would look at my writing and said, well, Mom, you didn't quite transition here the way you should. I was like, oh my gosh, I've created a monster.
Yeah.
But that was just lovely and fun. I hope he goes on to get his actual masters and not just the mom masters. But I think Jacob was the one that changed the most.
Yeah.
To where he was he would write characters, and Jacob had a big affinity to the RLIFs and the scientific people involved, and I did a lot of the kind of maybe the chaotic and zanier characters, and John was into the cosmic characters. There were characters we kind of to be crude, and P to circle around it and said these are mine, and Jacob would say these are kind of mine, but we would all have input. And then as far as the actual writing, it was pretty much Jacob and I. John is he eschews all things technological, so
usually
he doesn't even have a computer.
Literally, if I wrote something, I would put pen to paper and hand him a handwritten.
Yes, he would. And we would also record him because he has an acting background. So whenever we were really stuck and said, like, I need this monologue done, I would just record him and transcribe it. And because he does a lot of things off the top of his head, and I can't do that. I have to edit and be careful.
You have to share those recordings.
And they are the more like if there's a wild monologue in the
Yeah.
book, it's coming out of John's mouth.
Yeah.
So that's
Oh my, I need to see it.
If
yes.
if there's a character in the red zone,
If there's that's what
there's
he
a
says.
recording
If it's
of
in the
that
red
somewhere.
zone, that's him talking. Yeah. So that was it was just awfully fun, and the whole process was us just trying to find our way to working together, because that's so interesting. You asked if we divided up work, like you would write this scene and you would write that scene, and it was never that delineated.
No.
It was all over the place.
I mean, that's not entirely true. In the very beginning, we had our specific characters that I would write these characters and you would write these characters, Mom. And any time that these cosmic characters came in, Dad was on the phone or in person, because God knows we can't do it alone. But I think as we moved on and wrote more of the characters, and I became busier and couldn't write as quickly as you to begin with, I was like, oh, this is not going to work. We have to be a little more comfortable with everyone being able to write everyone as needed. But it did start as being a little more, have your own list of casting characters for yourself.
I think so many people who ask us the question of how do you team write are looking to do this, and we highly encourage anybody to try this, are looking to say, like, how do we do it? I really think we ran it more like a television writer's room than we ran it as a book writing. So we were very much crossing genres there. We had a table, we had meetings, we had butcher paper on the table, and we would sketch things out. We would be sharing our notes, and then we would collectively decide how things move forward, and then we would walk away with our writing assignments. So it was much more like that environment, and where we ran into kind of like this is a really interesting way of doing things, is that nobody could get away with anything.
Yeah.
Like as a writer, you can sit at your desk and you can get away with a lot of weird stuff because it's just you and there's nobody to hold you accountable. You can say, like, well, I think this character ought to do this. Well, if I brought that to the table, I'd have two people saying, no, you absolutely cannot do that. And then I would have to say, well, if I wanted to fight for it, I would say, well, wait a second, I'm going to write it and I'm going to show you.
Yeah. A lot of times things would stay dependent on how hard somebody would fight. It's like, oh, you must really believe in this. Well, there must be something there. Let's give it a little bit of air. But
you would have to prove it. You would have to prove it.
We did have to learn to trust each other. That, like, oh, I have this idea. And, the other two might be like, I don't know about that. But through so many trial and error of going, oh, I don't know about that. And then the person proving them, no, this can stay. I like this idea. Now, usually when someone brings up a wild idea, it's like, let them talk for a minute. Let's see.
I do really want to say, like, I think our ace in the hole, how you say it's like, it doesn't look fractured like three people had input or wrote it, because before the end, when everything went in a final draft on paper, it kind of went through Amy's lens. Like she was giving Jacob the mom master's degree. She has a master's in creative writing, and she was our ace in the hole. So we would throw all that stuff at her, and then it would be distilled and disseminated through her lens before it hit the page in the final form. So it would flow like it was not fractured from three.
We could, but two editors involved in this process.
Oh, yeah.
And the copy editor, the last pass that we just went through, she knew who wrote what. Oh,
she was my little sister.
She did.
So
she would come back to me and she's like, this was Jacob's chapter, wasn't it? And I said, how do you know that? And she would pick out grammatical tics that you would have, Jacob, and even ways of spelling things. Like sometimes, because how the book works, like if it was in Ireland, we might spell something with a British, because it was Ireland in the 30s, and we would kind of have that crossover of how the British spelling might look or how somebody might say a word. Shauna, our copy editor, picked out that I did that and Jacob did not. So she would find those words were not consistently spelled.
Yeah, but what an eye to detect that nuance.
She's amazing. She would be a contribution to human letters if she got back into editing, and I hope she does. If you're listening, Shauna.
I have so many questions from this. After you went through the editing or before that, did you do like a round of each of you to check it for consistency, or to, I don't know, did you even decide to use one type of spelling or specific words or ban specific words from characters,
I think we each edited in our own, like a writer's room. There would be pages kind of daily or at least
Yes.
weekly, and pages would get passed to you. And it's like, if you had a certain character, like Amy had said, I have a real affinity for this character, you might at the next meeting call someone to task, go, you know what? I just don't see this emotional. They're not going to get to that emotional high with that kind of stimulus. We need to change this. We need to massage that. It's too much or it's too little. So there, for me, that was the type of changes or editing I brought. I was never going to look down to the grammar level or something like that.
That's right.
Yeah. Any chapter that was written, one person would write it and then it would go to the other two people and they would each get their turn to edit it. And then it would go back to the first person to do another pass at it. Or if that first person felt like they weren't quite on it, it could be passed off to somebody else and they would take a pass at it. But every chapter or segment went to the other two to get their lens on it. So I do think that's part of the reason it became its own voice and not just any one of ours in a chapter, is that everyone had their hand in every chapter.
So it sounds to me that it was mostly a discovery also, pun intended in this case, of the plot as well.
Yeah, definitely.
And it was, and definitely when we're writing book 2 now, which we're in the process of doing, we learned so many things about ourselves and about each other in that process that this is going quite a bit faster, probably because we have that language and shortcut of, I believe you said to me yesterday, Jacob, now hear me out.
Yeah.
Or he would say, I'm just talking out loud to see where this goes, which means both of them say, just don't interrupt. Let me do this. Let me say this. And he would also be just like, I know you're not going to like this, but I'm going to say this. And so, but we've learned so much that it's going a bit faster and it's going a bit easier. Although I've been told it never gets easy.
Yeah. But even in book 1, Jacob would bring things like, if some of us had a problem, Amy had a problem of seeing a scene, visualizing a scene, him being a filmmaker, a visual artist, he would actually storyboard that scene for her. This is where I'd put the camera. This is where the shot changes would happen. This is what, and then from that, it's like, oh, okay, I got it now. And the scene would take off. So it was interesting what everybody brought. Their strong suits.
And one of those, Livia, was the scene in part 1 where Griff Tran approaches the Rosie on the dive site. And what is happening on that boat, I told Jacob what I wanted the vibe to be and showed him a few, even just a few visual pieces, like a slice from a movie or a few pieces of artwork. And he came back to me with actual storyboards, like a diagram of the boat and who was seated where and who was lying where and how everybody moved through that scene like a director would. And I wrote it from there. We went over all of that. And I loved that scene so much because of how we worked on that and how it came out. I feel is one of my favorite scenes.
Yeah, I do love that scene.
You know, when I read it, I imagine it like the famous dolly thumb, that it keeps zooming into something. I had that idea. And now that you mentioned, the book does have this cinematic quality to it. So do you think it was mostly because you were always trying to design the scenes from a visual perspective as well?
Absolutely. The way that scenes look are very important to me. Probably more important than they should be, but and like for that scene where Griff is approaching the Rosie, my mom, I think you showed me a scene from in Apocalypse Now. They're arriving to Kurt's, and it's very quiet, very serene, but uncanny and feels so unearthly. And we knew we wanted that. Love the idea of adding the lighting to that. And okay, now we're going to make it serene, but it's the middle of the ocean and it shouldn't be serene. That should be the uncanniness of it. But we're also going to have this lighting from the sub, Unit 2, that's coming up from below and lighting people from below. And that feels wrong. We want it to feel like this place where you would imagine you would immediately ponder your own existence. That if you started hearing voices from the dead, you almost wouldn't be surprised. Those kind of things are very important to me.
And then the dreams that Griff had as he was approaching that, like I would take something like what Jacob did, and I was like, okay, let me back up on the approach as he's sleeping and approaching that site. I took a look at like Heart of Darkness and Moby Dick and a few Cormac McCarthy passages and said, I really want to get existential and weird, and him contemplating like when the human mind is broken open and is expanded, how much you can scare yourself and how much is in there and how it can just kind of like swirl and almost like freak himself out before he even gets to the place. So when Jacob did that, I was able to bounce off of that in a literary way and back up and take some. And if you look really closely in the passage, there are a few nods grammatically and even just like on the sentence level to some of those authors. Just me saying thanks, guys.
And then I think the last thing to come in is performance, because you've got all
Yes.
that weirdness, and then there's like a caramel ribbon of comedy through the middle of it.
Yeah.
When you get to the people actually speaking, there's a comedic rhythm to them that breaks that tension when you need it to.
Yeah, we have a character on the boat named Penny who almost becomes like a crazed tour guide that is completely out of his mind, but would love to show people around.
Yeah.
I think a lot of that.
Yeah.
Show people around the carnage.
Yeah. I think a lot of that was from you, Dad, the performance of that.
That was out of love for the Harlequin in Heart of Darkness and the photojournalist in Apocalypse Now. So, I mean, and all of the scenes, like for that, What You Like, Jacob from Martin McDonough, just like extremely dark comedy and people behaving as they shouldn't in a situation that calls for a completely different reaction.
Yeah.
Which is, one of the, tenets of comedy
Mhm.
is how to pull that off. So I just love how that scene came together
Yeah, I love that scene.
with the
It's one of my
three of
faves.
us and how it turned out. I'm just absolutely pleased with it.
I think it's my favorite from the book. The other favorite that I have that I want to ask you how you wrote it, it's the backwards scene that you have towards the end of the book when chaos starts basically backtracking everything. And you described it in a way that it was super visual. I'm not a particularly visual reader, but I could see everything going back. So since you mentioned the storyboarding and all the acting, animation in there, how did you come up with that scene?
That one, Jacob was in a time of his life. I believe you were moving.
Yeah, because we started this book, Jacob was living upstairs.
Yeah, so he's a little bit out of the picture, or like we had to switch rhythms as a family again. We had to figure out how are we going to finish this with he's doing that. And I am not a very big genre reader, so I was very intimidated when I realized I was like, I'm going to have to do this by myself. I was like, oh my gosh, this is not the person you want on this job. This was one of the areas that John did a recording. Pretty much everything Chaos says is John in a recording. And then I watched a lot of Looney Tunes, there was another trailer, and I think it was like a Neil Gaiman short-lived show on Netflix where there was a lot of defying gravity and kind of Matrix types moves. I was just really trying to get ideas about how these two could unravel the world and make it their playground.
Well, I don't think I helped you because you were like,
no, you didn't.
It's like, what? I'm not the person to do it. And it's like, it's just a wizard battle at the end of the book. That's all you got to do. It's just a wizard battle. And she looked at me like,
no idea
that
what that means.
Decidedly does not help me.
Not only that, I don't know what that means.
But I love it because we ended up with something that was a little bit different.
Yeah.
From that.
Because I've never read one. So I was like, well, I guess I'll just do my best.
Yeah.
and because these were our characters, we'll start with who they are and what they would want and what they would do and how they would move. But as far as what Chaos said and how he maneuvered through that scene, that was mostly you. And then at the end, Jacob came in and said, this is what needs to happen emotionally in this scene. It needs to start at a low level, move to a peak, and then it's very standard. But when you're writing, you can forget stuff like that, like about how to shape something. It's very hard to see it when you're in the trenches. It's very easy. But so when Jacob was backed away like that and had a little bit of distance, he became the one to say, okay, take it down, add a few more lines here, add another punch here, so that's kind of how that scene worked.
Mhm.
And I liked that one too.
I think we also talked a bit about like, okay, we want to break reality. What does that look like?
Yeah.
If someone's doing a backflip and there's a tear in space, what does that look like? How do you move? Where do you go?
Yeah.
Weird questions like that we hadn't thought about until that chapter, and you had to write it.
And specifically what you said, Livia, about like chaos moving things backwards, about
Yeah.
how chaos can bend time. I wanted something to show that he had ultimate power and he could do whatever he wanted whenever he wanted, and that he was there for the entertainment. This could be over whenever he wanted it to, but he wanted it to be the show. So the way he would move time and kind of like pull sorrow backwards and reposition him, it's almost kind of like when you're playing a game and you want to do a backsies and you want to like, was like, oh no, not that piece, not that move. So that's kind of what he did. Not even just like, well, I could have kept playing, but I'm just going to show you I have control here. I can do this. Part of the game metaphor moving into action, just making sure, and part of Jacob's direction in that scene to say was like, now show he has ultimate control and he can end this whenever he wants. You just to make sure that everybody knows who the boss is.
I actually thought it was a very interesting scene because for the complexity that it had in terms of what you wanted to show, the imagery you wanted to show, it was quite succinct. It made it more punchy and more impactful simply because it showed how easy chaos it is. You didn't need a very long description to actually achieve it. I thought it was quite impressive, actually.
Thank you. And I think that might be because I was so terrified in writing it that I didn't want to put any
You don't want to do too much.
I didn't want to put any length in there that didn't need to be there because it would be
As soon as you could back away.
yes.
All right.
I was like, and I'm out. No more. So I was like, and I do think some people have commented that that scene is a lot shorter than they expected it to be.
Yeah.
And I do think that was just my outright terror in writing it. But it ended up working. So
We hope. Not good.
Yeah, it did.
thank you. I'm glad it did.
You mentioned the tiles and the different authors that influenced you. Now, I want to do a spin on that question. Did your preferences for a first person, third person narrative influence your choices? Because you have most of the book is third person, you have some first person frame narrative, and there are some sections on second person. So, how did you pick?
I think there was actually one time, Mom, that you wrote a passage in think first person, and I was editing it and I thought it was a mistake, and I changed it to third person. I called you later that day and you were so mad at me that, that I would dare to change it. But I think a lot of the reason that DOS is first person is
This is Oliver Doss, whose diaries are in between everything. Yeah.
yes.
Sorry.
Yeah. And he's really the only one that is first person.
No, Griff is.
Griff is first person.
Oh, Griff is first person. You're right. So anytime that we have letters is more first person.
Letters and diaries, they're first person. Yeah. And there's a reason for it.
Yeah. I think one, it's very atmospheric and gets you inside the mind, and you can have the inner monologue, which was very useful to be able to write DOS.
Very.
It was also kind of a carryover from something that we had planned in book 3 and now had to be a little twisted to service book 1.
Some of that, Livia, is that I really enjoyed working on point of view in graduate school. And I did my thesis on first person omniscient. Somebody said, was like, well, you invented that. And I said, no, watch, like there are other authors who can do first person omniscient. Like there should be that Alice Munro does it sometimes. You can see, even though she's speaking in first person, how a character can maneuver their way into seeing things that they shouldn't be able to see and speaking about things they shouldn't be able to know, and how that transition works. I'm always fascinated by point of view and how it can affect a story and how you can do it right and slide in and out so that a reader is very comfortable with those changes. And as a reader, I feel that if an author can't make those transitions very comfortably, that it takes me out of the book entirely. Almost everything that I was doing was just like, I want to see if I can get away with it. And and these guys were here to tell me, it was like, you didn't get away with it, try it again. Or they would, and they wouldn't notice. And that would be just delightful. And so when there's a direct address from Sorrow, the epilogue and the prologue, so that was like, that's another mode that I can sneak in there and see if I can pull it off. Really, it's just me having fun, kind of like chaos at the end, just kind of like zipping around, just going, wee, whipping the floor around and like putting something in a trash can and booting it out into the cosmos. It was like, that was just me doing that. Yeah. And it was just, it was incredibly fun. I really do hope it works for everybody, because I definitely feel that as a reader, it jerks me out of a story to know that.
Yeah, and also the person in which it is written, even the tense as well, it can change immersion, it can change how you see the scene, how you perceive it, how you perceive the biases of the characters as well.
Yes, that's some of Grace Paley. her short stories, she does that. When I was studying her, was studying Grace Paley and see how she would shift tenses in the middle of sentences. And it was something the copy editor kind of dinged me on the last round, was just like, you need to keep one tense. So we would really kind of look at a word level about like, how do you want to mimic human speech? Because we change tenses when we're in stories. And you mostly do it to bring the listener into your story a bit more. You might be saying, I was walking down the street and then this guy jumps out. And so you would switch tenses there so you could bring that person there with you. So we had to be very careful. I think you might have gotten a version where Shauna hadn't put me through the ringer with all of that. So some of that might be gone now, but a lot of it, like I had to very much be careful with her about how to select the specific instances and when to do it, and definitely make sure that it's purposeful.
The one thing I do like about the narrative changes, and we've talked about this before, is that, well, you have to show, don't tell. Yeah, show, don't tell. And my thing is like, you know what? If you tell really well, like I think it's a question of how good.
But that's what we do as humans. We tell.
We tell.
Yeah.
That's what we do. So it's like there's so many times like when you're changing narrative points of view, and it's like there's a lot in this book that is just someone telling someone else.
Yes.
Either it's on videotape or it's in a journal or it's in a letter or it's somewhat epistolary, and it kind of harkens back to that way of telling a story, and it's like it still has forward momentum, hopefully, and work.
Yeah, but we are very conscious how that might fall flat. So we always had to be very active in that telling, and to make sure that the listener was being brought in, that the character was conscious of the listener, because when you're telling, you are entertaining.
Absolutely, but I think that's where some of the visuals would come in from Jacob, because if you're telling, there is that moment where the little movie running in your head should stop from somebody in front of you telling a story, and then you should start visualizing that story and
for
you're
yourself.
into it.
So a reader starts to become the stand-in for the people they're telling. So that's, that was in the part where the newsroom is putting together the tapes of the discovery and trying to figure out what happened from the letter and then what's on the back of the letter. Is like, at some point, if we were successful, they're all telling each other this story, but at some point the reader should start to take over and say, oh, they're also telling me I should be getting these pieces. And, this person across the room has a certain piece and another person has a certain piece. Howard, the CEO, has another piece, but the reader should have all the pieces except Howard's.
Or should be able to puzzle them together.
Yes,
Exactly.
That's the job. And you also need to be very conscious of the reader's process and giving them room and trusting them that they're working really hard along with you. Don't feed too much, don't feed too little.
Exactly.
And that was the luck that we had in having all of us at the table. We can say, it's like, are your wheels spinning as a reader? Are you getting this? And they would just be like, not yet, baby. Keep going.
Yeah. or are you judging me and spoon feeding me too much? Maybe we need to back off a little bit here.
Right.
That's where that writing room would come in.
I would say in that room, there also has to be, as much as there are times where the reader is able to piece things together from character to character, because each character has their own little piece and way that they see the situation. There's also revelation moments where all of the characters and the reader are learning something new together. And there has to be a time where it's convenient or tone-wise easy to slip into, all right, now we're all going to watch a video and learn some horrible things, or now we're all going to read this letter together and have a new development.
Just like you said, changing narrative points of view. It's a tall order, man. We could have just written that scene from the deck of the boat and been all action, but that's
originally what we did.
That's what we did.
That
and
is
then we
what
decided
we
to go a different way.
Well, originally it was an documentary about like years later about the discovery. Somebody was watching the documentary. Well, we also had temporal distance, which we don't have very much of in the book, but we had a lot of distance. So it was somebody watching, I think it was about 10 years later, and all of the changes that humanity had gone through. So the mystery was on the end of somebody watching and what had gone on. And then on top of that, there was the mystery of what the heck is going on in the documentary. So it kind of read a lot more like a screenplay. So you're not getting a lot except visual. I don't know. It was a pass. We did it.
There have been many passes.
It was one way of doing it.
Yeah.
And we just said that was one way, but we didn't feel, I think some beta readers were just, I think that was when Tyler said he was bored. That was one of Jacob's best friends. It was at the table. That was another pass. Sorry. But we did have beta readers who were just like, eh.
I think the problem that we ran into with the documentary was that to have too many unknowns at once and not be able to grab onto anything, we were using comedy as a crutch to continue the tone and push things further and keep the reader interested. And it was fun, but it wasn't as good as it could be, you know?
We just trashed it. And that was a very difficult decision to make, to say that this is not working and we need to start over. So we closed the temporal distance and made it a few weeks later. We had fewer things happening in between, but just enough to lend importance to the event itself, to the discovery, to say, well, something very big happened out there and we're not quite sure what, but everybody's really upset on the governmental level, on the world stage. We move forward as a news organization to try to figure out what happened. To us was kind of the sweet spot of being able to describe for the people in the room, going just like, there's a lot of weight to this event. And some of it is personal and some of it is not. Some of it is professional and some of it is just personal curiosity about what happened out there. We started to look at all of the ways that people could approach that temporal distance. And that became kind of fun in itself.
Yeah, because you also have time jumps in the books.
Right.
So it starts, I think, in 1992 and it goes around 5 years, if I recall.
It used to be 5 years. And then
I think in a previous draft it was 5 years. I don't know if it's 5 or 3. I'll have to go back and read our own book. But
yeah. Anyway, we take it from the discovery to, forward about 3 years, I think, and the anniversary of that discovery. We wanted plenty of time for the collapse to happen, for everybody to respond to that and to just about recover. And we know what that looks like from the plague, the recent plague, what a collapse looks like. We pushed that a little bit, but obviously not much, because some of this collapsing, like I would take things from like Hurricane Katrina and what happened there, really do research into what humans do when things fall apart. Getting all of this together in that 3 years and to do almost a recovery and then to lead us into book 2 to the point where humans are afraid it's going to happen again. So you move into like another phase of not just reacting to the event, but reacting to your own fear of how you responded to that. There's like, oh no, is there going to be another collapse because of this thing, or that because of an assassination, or because of this person's death, or this, all of that becomes like humans are feeding off of their own fear. And that's kind of where we wanted to leave them so that we could crush them again at the beginning of book 2.
I imagine, given the subtitle of the series, which is An Apocalypse in 5 Parts, that the niceties of the end couldn't actually last.
Nothing stays fun.
No. Circling back to developing the book, did you have any point in which you didn't like your characters? Like one of you wanted to make a character something different, like a different genre, different background, speak in a different manner or anything like that?
Oliver Doss.
Oliver Doss was the biggest fight.
Yeah.
I wouldn't even say fight. It was the biggest struggle, because he became the glue of the book.
But it took so long for us to find who Oliver Doss was. He began as almost like a Steve Jobs figure, like this larger than life wise man that knew everything and could see the future and had a direction and always had an answer for any question. And not that that was bad, but it just wasn't quite working the way that we needed it to. And we had a plot line. Once we got into, we're going to follow Oliver Doss and kind of look at the collapse through his lens. And that became very useful to us. It became a lot more about who Oliver Doss is and the struggles that he has. And once we created his backstory and kind of fleshed out his trauma, it was like, well, this larger than life Steve Jobs character didn't really fit anymore. It kind of became an issue. And that was something that our first editor, Aaron Stalka, pointed out to us and said, this doesn't work. You got to fix this. These parts are not doing the double duty that they can do. So we kind of all had to come back together and figure out, well, okay, if Oliver Doss does have this trauma and he has Lucia, maybe there is a father-daughter connection there. Maybe we can use that to leverage his journey through trauma. It became more about his relationship with the world and breaking it down and kind of using that to narrow his view on his relationship with this orphan in front of him.
That was one of the most difficult rewrites
Yeah.
that we had to do, because we had to discover we had to discover how to make Oliver Doss the glue to the book.
Yeah.
And I remember we would go to
there's a little pub around the corner here, and we would go on the weekend, and we'd have a little something to drink, and we would just like
I would just cry. I would just
it's another week where we didn't have it.
And one of my friends actually is behind the bar, and she'd just be kind of like wiping the table and looking away, going like, "Whoa, marital troubles."
Yeah,
But
it wasn't
Mindy,
that. It was like
no.
it was one more week where a developmental editor would go,
No. And I would just have a nice little IPA and just cry in it, salty IPA. But, all of that came together when I kind of woke up one morning. I have this thing before I go to sleep. If I have trouble in writing, I ask the universe for the answer. And sometimes I think it's the way of if you actually ask your brain, for example, to just like, I need you to work on this tonight. Sometimes it'll be like a night or two. And then I'll wake up in the morning and I'll just kind of like, I'll text Jacob and I'll get John. I said, it's a love story. And both of them kind of looked at me like, what do you mean? I was like, it's a platonic love story, a father-daughter love story
father-daughter
of these two people who are very broken coming together and having a human connection. I kind of get a little tingle when I think about that moment, because I really feel that it was just kind of not my idea, that it was just kind of like it was given to me as just like there was an aspect of the book that was missing, and it was love. And I said, this is definitely it.
And that was when you came up with it. That was why character of Nessa that kicks off the book being Howard's daughter. And that was at the very 0 hour that
right when she showed up, and I was like, hey, guess what, guys? That was a surprise too. I said, guess what, guys? Guess who Nessa is? And they're like, who? I was like, it's Oliver Doss's daughter, because like we should have the actual daughter.
Yeah.
Having the too late moment with Dad, and as he's trying to repair himself with Lucia. So it was like, now we have another dimension of all of that came so late.
Yeah.
All of that came so late. And I think it was just because we had all of the cosmic stuff down that getting down to the human level, we were tinkering at the bottom, and that was the aspect.
Dude,
that kind
there
of
is
threw
another
us.
example though of a character that wasn't popular.
I was gonna say,
and that was Voldemort.
Oh yeah.
Oh my gosh! When you see, here's the thing.
No, we have to say it like Voldemort.
Mary was not popular either.
No. Oh, Mary wasn't hugely popular either. But Voldemort was like
Voldemort.
Jacob was like, no.
Voldemort is the Nazi in Brazil. Jacob said no.
Yeah. This is one of a few examples that my mom would come to me and say something like, just get a page. I think Voldemort was originally like somebody's gardener that happened to be a Nazi. And I was like, no, absolutely not. This is ridiculous. And then 2 days later, she'd come back to me with like 8 pages of notes, me like, here's why Voldemort is now integral to the plot. I've made him the most important part of this scene, just to spite you, it felt like. And I'd have to read it and go like, it's brilliant. I'm okay with it now.
Yeah. We can't cut him now.
I wrote backstories. I wrote him in 1942. I wrote him in 1921. I was like, here. Yeah. Guess what? Now there's a Nazi in this. I think Jacob just like every time I say Nazi, Jacob is like, no, mom, no, mom. I just think somebody who hasn't lived through maybe like the 80s and 90s, like they don't understand how much of a boogeyman Nazis were to Americans at that time. Because I mean, like they're in Steven Spielberg movies, they're in the Wonder Woman shows, they're in Blues Brothers, just like you bring those and just automatically villain
connection.
That's right. Horrible. And so we did want to play with that. I wanted to play with what elements of humanity can be found in the inexcusable. There was just nothing better to trot out than that old trope and say, let's play with this.
And I also love that Voldemort is such a great lens because he's seen everything crumble before.
Yeah.
He's had to flee and he's seen it all crumble. And it's like, now it's like he's looking around going, been there, done that, seen,
Each of the characters brought a very different point of view to the story, very different biases. And I felt that through the story and through the POVs, it was also palpable in the sense that every bit of the story will give me a different clue, not only as to what was happening, but as to how they were interpreting what was happening.
I absolutely love that worked for you.
Yeah.
Because as a person who has white skin and has not traveled the world as much as one needs to write a story like this, to really be in these places. And that is, I feel for me, like it was, and I'm sure for the guys, but just like a painful part of this. Like we don't have $10,000 to travel the world the way, like I have not been to Antarctica. I have not been to
Brazil
the
or Ghana.
Campinas. Am I saying that right? Brazil and the outskirts of Sao Paulo. I've been to San Antonio, so I know Mexico a little bit, but not the way I need to.
Yeah.
So
Mexico
it was
City.
painful.
Yeah.
It was painful.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, but there was a lot of research done.
I think I overcompensated with
Yeah.
research a little bit.
Yeah.
You know,
When we all sat down to do this, maybe that decision wasn't made of, oh, we're doing this. One of the things I remember talking about was it's like, it's important that if it's going to be a global apocalypse, it should be a global apocalypse. It shouldn't be, how does this affect people in North America? It should be,
or New York City.
how does this affect people?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, that was absolutely something that we talked about. I think the moment that we had the original idea that I came out with the Arlifts, and then we all talked and we have, okay, well, there's going to be Manny and the discovery of the sleeping one in the Pacific, and this is Lovecraft. It's like because of what the Lovecraft stories are and all of their fears of any different type of person of the world, resulting hatred of them, which is disgusting to read. But if we're going to have this global apocalypse in reaction, we have to have the representation of those global people. And I think because of the way that cosmic horror has existed in the past or was popularized by Lovecraft, cosmic horror is going to mean something entirely different in every culture. And I think that idea really excited us to try and figure out, what does cosmic horror mean in Ghana? How would a culture react differently than a bunch of people in a newsroom in America, you know? And that got us really excited.
And the cultural backgrounds will come into play even deeper as the
Yeah.
series goes on.
And I think one of those things about not every writer can travel the world. I mean, like we're not a rich crew generally,
Yeah.
but I think you should try. I think you should attempt it. I can't wait for somebody to say, well, you kind of got Accra wrong because you need to do this, that, and the other. I'll be just like, I'd love to come.
Yeah.
I'd love
Yeah.
Are you offering? Because I will be there. It's absolutely not a matter of how much I would love to see all these places, but it's the world.
Yeah. And then the fear of having permission to create characters that are not from your cultural background. So that's why it's so important, Livia, to hear that it did work.
Yeah.
Because, you have that fear of, oh gosh, is this really mine to get into?
Right. And so many people like you, Livia, like reached out to us, the advanced readers, even beta readers, who just said like, oh, you want the accent over here, or she wouldn't say this when she's insulting somebody. She would say this. And I've just been so grateful for everybody who really wants their culture reflected properly, who reached out to say that. And I'm just so grateful.
Trying to round up this section of the episode, did your process change from book one to book two? And is it changing again now that you are working on it?
I don't know that it'll ever stop changing. We almost don't have a process to begin with. We have like our own, it feels like a whole Rolodex of exercises that we try. We started book two and we were like, okay, well, we have these characters. Let's try and just list everybody out and try and get their motivations. Next, let's try and list out all the organizations and plot them out from point A to point B. And we did kind of do that with book one, but it changed with everybody's availability. And a lot of it is just based on feel. At the moment, I feel I can't write this chapter or I can't plot out this book because I don't know these characters well enough. So let's just invent an exercise where we're going to sentence 1, 2, and 3 about what this character means and what they want to accomplish. And once we have that, we're going to invent a new exercise until we feel comfortable enough to do what we know is the next step, which plotting the book. I don't know that we have a specific process.
We have to keep changing because just where you are in your life cause us as not only as a family, but as a creative unit to say, okay, this is how we're going to adjust and this is how we're going to play now. I'm sure that that's going to happen again. So, but what book one taught us is that you just need to be just on the lookout for these changes that come. And they mostly come from Jacob because he's just young, and that's just the way it's going to be. John and I, we're changing in our confidence. We're changing in our, like, even the BookTube channel that we have, Talking Story, like that's changing in how people bring things to us.
Life's a journey. Everything changes.
Yeah.
It also changes like our scheduling. Like we used to all live together and we would talk over dinner like that. Most of our dinners were writers' meetings. That's just how it was.
Yeah.
And not only that I live apart, but we have Talking Story and we upload Monday, Wednesday, Friday every week. It's like, well, okay, now we have to do a Zoom call, but we can't do it on the nights that we're shooting, and we have a stream this night. So we're going to meet, weirdly enough, just have a family Zoom meeting on Thursday night and try and work this out, So the scheduling kind of becomes a component as well.
Yeah, and it can be a bit chaotic, I imagine, as well.
Yeah. People get tired and cranky, but that's just part of it.
I think there's definitely we're having one of those weeks right now where we're just like, we need to put the book back on the schedule. Everybody knows what that means. It means we've kind of gotten away with, it's fallen too far down the ladder of priority. So we need to bump it up a little bit. And the meetings after that, where it's like, say we've got Discovery pre-sale going, or the channel's really busy, or our life is really busy and something's going on, that we have to say, okay, we got to bump the book back up. And that meeting where we come back is just, everybody's just groggy. Like it's a bunch of people who haven't had caffeine for 3 days just going, I don't know.
The amazing thing though is what happens every time that all three of us get in the same room. By the time that meeting is over, there's just such an energy.
Yeah.
Like there have been a couple plotting meetings and, charts and graphs being made and arcs being sketched out. And then the first one, all three of us were there and we could look at each other in the face and go, okay, who has the craziest idea? Who has something that they're kind of probably shouldn't even say out loud?
Yeah. And somebody does.
And we all do. Everyone has probably 2 or 3, right? So then we start saying that, and then we start pinballing and bumping off of each other's ideas like that. And then by the end of that meeting, it's like, I can see the book. That hasn't gone away. I still think that charge, that fun hasn't gone away.
9 times out of 10, when there's a meeting with all three of us in person, so it happens less over Zoom or, FaceTime or whatever we do, but 9 times out of 10, as in person, the meeting ends with high fives.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Yeah. And that's the best inspiration, right?
Mm-hmm.
The best moment.
Yeah. And it's always, it always starts with, I don't know. I don't know how we're going to get out of this. I don't know. And it's kind of like, we just have all memories of those previous high fives are just wiped.
Yeah.
Because we think this is it. We'll never be able to fix it. And then happens every time.
Did you ever have a moment in which one of you was in the classic writer's crisis of this is all trash and the other two were cheering up?
Weekly, I think one of us is in that moment, especially when I was learning from you, Mom, when we were doing the first draft, and it felt like I was in a creative writing crash course. We're approaching the 95% mark of this first draft that we're doing, and I feel like a complete fraud. I have no idea what I'm doing. And then Mom will talk me out of it, and Dad will talk me out of it. And the next week, Mom will come to me like, I don't know sci-fi. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm a fraud. And I'll talk her out of it, and Dad will talk her out of it. And then Dad comes to me and goes, I don't know. I feel like I don't do enough. I'm a complete fraud. And it's like the book wouldn't exist without your idea. But I think we all take our turns of feeling like we have no reason being here.
Yeah.
The imposter syndrome, like Jacob, you struggled with that. I keep struggling with that. Yeah. And then there are just days where I'm just like, this is the best book ever written. And then an hour later, I was like, it's garbage. It's garbage. It should be set on fire.
No one should ever see this. No one should ever see it. But it's weird because, even now it's like we were signing books to send out yesterday. And I'm like, what am I doing?
Yeah.
What is this? This doesn't make any sense.
I know, right up here.
We were talking about it. It feels so weird to write in a book and imagine that the value doesn't go down. That's such a weird feeling.
Yeah.
Yeah. Shall we move into discussing a bit more of the themes of the books? So this part will be a spoiler, so feel free to go all in if you have to. Let me get started with another basic question just to get us going. Why did you choose the early 90s as a setting? Was it because of the limited technology, the anecdote you mentioned?
A lot of it was the technology, especially when we got to the idea of discovery only being able to happen now because the technology, like cameras, exist. Now you can broadcast images that humanity is seeing, and it can reach other people rather than just verbally telling them,
And not just television studio, the advent of the handheld camera that we were interested in, which is also why we started with the Rodney King riots in Los Angeles, because it was started by what a person captured on a home camera, and kind of a bit of the beginnings of that kind of devilish aspect of humanity being able to see things they normally can't see or haven't seen in the past. So it was almost kind of like humanity developing an omniscience. We loved the intersection of the technology and where humans were in 92. It was kind of like a mini collapse in Los Angeles based on one human being and a camera. It was a bit of a flag right there at the beginning, going just like, here we are. We're at this point in our development where now this is happening.
It being sci-fi and us knowing what's coming in book 2 and 3 and so on is when we hit modern day, or say we get to 2010 in book whatever it is, I don't remember our timeline right now. We need technology to be in a different place than it actually was in 2010. So the collapse is a way for suddenly the internet is really useful during the collapse, more so than it was back then. And that technology would be accelerated because it becomes more of a priority, or cloud computing becomes more of a priority. Exploration of the ocean and developing that technology becomes more of a priority. So the trajectory of scientific development and technological development kind of shifts because of what happened in 1992 to get us more in the direction of where we were looking to go for modern day.
In this book in particular, you discussed a lot about the impact of information and misinformation. I think that also having a limited way of communicating what was happening in real time was also setting up the mood. It would have been very different nowadays if you set it up in 2025, everybody with a phone streaming.
That was, constantly though, we would have to tell Jacob, he would write a scene where somebody would have a phone and we said, nope. Or somebody would hop on the internet and send an email like, nope. He was like, well, what did you have back then? We're like, nada, buddy, not a thing.
Yeah.
So we have a 1992 technology. It was on my bulletin board for so long. These are the things you have to work with as far as technology in 92. And he just looked at it like, we're just like, you heathens, you. I was like, yeah.
You were cavemen.
Yeah. How did you function? I was like, we were actually quite happy.
Yeah.
I wouldn't mind going back to that time now.
Yeah, from there, from the setting, basically, as a summary for the listeners, as the title highlights, you have the discovery of the Eldritch form, the sleeping one, in the book, and that basically sends humanity spiraling down. You have the collapse after that, and that changes everything. But what I want to focus is in how it affects the governments, because the path that the governments take afterwards, it's pretty different. And something that perhaps it sounds a bit too grimdark, even though the book isn't grimdark, but I think a lot of what happens in the book is because we humans are too used to navel gazing. A lot of our beliefs, a lot of our systems are based on believing that we are the only ones. And so when we have this evidence, in this case in the book, that we are not the only ones, everything collapses. To me, it was a very interesting exploration of how that fundamental belief that we have ingrained one way or another actually affects society. Do you want to elaborate a bit more on your ideas for exploring that theme?
I love that you are looking at that, because one of the things that we thought would be funny, what if we wrote an alien invasion book where the aliens slept the whole time and it was humans who shot themselves in the foot? And that was just really my aspect of just like, I don't think I have any credentials in genre. So I was like, I can look at humans, I can look at human history, and that's what I'm better at and more comfortable with. So I felt that was another kind of cheat for me to say, just like, what if it just never, in the first book, it just doesn't wake?
The interesting thing too is that's that crossroads of how cosmic horror works. If you start to anything that you could draw a little faith in or strength from, patriotism or bureaucracy or diplomacy or
religion,
or scientific method,
community,
any of these things that you kind of feel like, oh, this is solid underneath me. when you start to see a bigger cosmic truth revealed to you that makes all of that underneath you kind of a shifting sand situation, I'm not sure anymore of anything. That's where that anxiety and that horror starts to come from, right? I think that was a big theme for us.
Yeah, when you mentioned the government, assuming you're talking about the UEA, the United Earth Alliance, that forms as kind of the substitute for United Nations, because United Nations just wasn't hacking it as far as a global government that needs to represent humanity in case the thing wakes up. Like, we need to be able to make decisions as a planet. Toot sweet, let's go. One of the things that our developmental editor, Aaron, caught the first time around is that needed to be strengthened
More
incredibly.
present, yeah.
And the UEA was always kind of present in our drafts, but in the round that you saw and exists now, all of that governmental jockeying for position and who comes to power and why, what was their reasoning and what a gap a religion might leave if they make a misstep. We used Catholicism because we needed to go to Mexico, and that was, like the primary religion there, where if Catholicism falls apart in Mexico, what does that really look like and who would step into power? In that instance, we decided it would be the mafia. In other countries, it looked very different. I mean, we're going to explore this more in book 2 about countries who are outside of the Judeo-Christian model and how they responded and how they continue to respond. We didn't go to the Middle East, for example, to see how the Muslims responded, but we give the hint that they seem to be okay with it. So they have some background in the Quran that says, yeah, it could have happened. As a country, it was like they might land on their feet, which we thought was kind of funny because the Middle East and the Western point of view was just always like pit of conflict. And we just thought it was like, maybe there was just this one shot that they had to say, no, we're good.
Yeah, we're all right.
It was interesting because I know it's cosmic horror, but when I read it, it reminded me of Arthur Clarke's 3001, The Final Odyssey, because it also has a collapse of society in which you have one fundamental belief that collapses and everything changes radically after that. But beyond the governments, as you mentioned, you also have religion in this case. And I found it very interesting that when one religion fails, then you have all these cults appearing that they seemingly answer reality in this case. And we have Ashanti who is basically embedded in one of those, and we can follow her. How did that idea came up, and was there anything specific that you wanted to explore with it?
I think it continues to be a really big theme for the entire series, the battle between the power of science and religion. I think religion kind of exists for different reasons, kind of with some tweaks here and there for everybody, but a lot of people find comfort in their place in the universe through religion and the purpose of themselves and humanity and what they're meant to do and how to act. And once all of that is ripped away, it kind of became a question of, well, who's going to step up to the plate? And if there's this being that there were prophets in the past, and there was a creature that was supposedly found in the Arctic, or there was this Aztec priestess Zuma that they are beginning to unearth in Mexico City, like all of this past history is already there, and now there's a cult that is formed out of that is able to raise their hand and go, called it. Everyone come to me. I've got the answers now. That when the fabric of your religion kind of falls apart, you have another place to go. It's just a matter of whether or not you have those cosmic questions and the sands start shifting below you. I think humanity will always come up with their own faith-based answers to, through their own nature, try and answer their purpose and their place in the universe. I don't think there's any way for religion to go away just after that kind of cosmic discovery. It may change for a lot of people, and it becomes a matter of how many things can we answer with this new faith and how many things can we answer with our scientific developments. Is one more powerful than the other? Is one going to fail me where another wouldn't? And that's kind of a lot of what we play with.
That's the kind of push me, pull you momentum. Yeah. It's so fascinating to me because there's never been a time in history where we don't create story to define what we don't understand and ourselves in the place what we don't understand. So it was just kind of fun to play with, what if there was kind of a small sect or a schism of a belief system that would be thought of as a bunch of kooks if this discovery had never happened, but now all of a sudden they could be somewhat ascendant. What would that say about our need to create and make story to define ourselves and our reality? What would that say any port in a storm for that type of moment and feeling? So it's like, I just think we had a lot of fun with it.
We also had a little bit of fun with organized religion responding in kind of a clunky way. It seems in the book that I pick on the Catholics, or we pick on the Catholics, but I didn't. What I meant by approaching Catholicism, not only because I needed them to be really present in Mexico for that storyline, but I needed that kind of governance to show in a religious structure. Not that it's not present in other aspects of, I just felt it was just so present in Catholicism that if one move is made at the top, at the Vatican level, that it could kind of ripple down and show how inflexible kind of behemoth religious organization could be. And mostly because I worked for Catholics for about 10 years. So I know that they can be like really solid in its approach and also inflexible. And it takes a while for that big organization to turn even just a little bit. I found that aspect something that I knew that I could do to say, okay, we'll show that religion is having a bit of an issue. If the Vatican kind of whiffs it, there's some internal conflict inside the Catholic Church about how to respond to this. I mean, we call cult what we don't understand, that they are basically smaller sects saying we need some flexibility in human response to the unknown right now. And so these little things start popping up, like Dennis Began, who breaks into the lab to destroy it, but then gets a look at one of the Arlifts, Claire, and has this religious epiphany about what the Arlifts could mean and what human creation is and what evolution might be. And this guy is just like taking it to the extreme. And he has this newsletter and he's going around having these, it's just a flexible response is all.
What we do too. I mean,
Right.
in these moments of high turmoil,
Yeah.
historically, this is what we do in these moments. So, and then the other thing that we kind of played with is in Mexico City as well, and in Ghana, like the ideas of their cultural history in mysticism starts coming present again, and they start relying on that.
Some of these other, like voodoo in West Africa and the Aztecs in Mexico, and they mention others around the world. And we are going to play with that a bit more about how just like it's the old religions coming back because they're so small at this point that they can have a little bit more maneuverability. We liked the aspect of some of these older cultures accidentally rubbing up against the cosmic and having evidence of that kind of leak through. We liked the kind of back to basics feel, even though it is kind of brutal in some instances, but humans can be. We wanted to show just like not only a cultural response, but a smaller community flexible response.
I really like the response of Dennis Began in particular, the one that you mentioned. I think it also speaks volumes of how, when we are desperate, how easy it is to believe in anything, especially on the first thing that we see. What he did at that point, it was out of desperation. And then he just got a group of desperate people trying to understand this new universe. And it cascaded into have a considerable effect in the story as well. Something interesting is that he's not worshipping quote unquote gods, he's worshipping the Arlifts, which are AI. Do you think there is anything in there, a contradiction perhaps? He believes in gods that are actually human made.
The apostles of the singularity, I think we call them. I think a lot of the reason that it existed is because when we were moving into, all right, this is going to be cosmic horror, my mom would come to both of us and be like, I don't understand the Cthulhu cult. Everyone dies. Why would you want that? I don't understand. Why would you praise Cthulhu? I think through the creation of the apostles of the singularity, we were kind of able to answer that question. Like there's just a desperate need to have an answer. Once you see the face of power, you feel like in that cosmic horror tropey way, I have no hope of this future of my life even remaining the same if I survive. Therefore, in this desperate plea, my only hope is to bow down to what I believe to be God.
And the off chance I might be spared. But humans, we had Oliver Doss say at some point that, or Lucia asked him, why did you put Arlifts in human form when some of the other artificial life scientists are using like blobs or shapes, or because they didn't want any kind of humanity imposing any emotion or feeling towards the artificial life. Oliver Doss made the decision to do it. And he said, I did want a human response to it because it might become dangerous to us one day, or we might become dangerous to it. And I think that Dennis Began's response to that, when he finally sees the human form and how it's starting to become ascendant and intelligence, and the response is the same almost, not only to that Cthulhu figure, and as you beautifully called it, the eldritch form. I'm going to use that. That's
really good.
good way to put it. That the response to the Eldritch form is a bit the same. It's just I'm going to kneel down to something I don't understand in the hopes that it doesn't destroy me. We also have, that isn't that kind of an Old Testament-y kind of feeling about God too, where it's just like, I will smite you if you don't worship me kind of, feeling in religion, and that feel that like we are created in God's image, that somehow there is a dude with a big beard sitting up on a cloud, that's how we picture God. There's always humanity kind of reflected in these things. It's so interesting that you picked up on that kind of self-reverence.
It's interesting, the self-reverence part, because for me, the cosmic horror strain is one of the things that when you get down to it, it's like you get to the end of the story and it's like, and we are ants basically to the eldritch form, whatever you want to say, because we can't even understand. And it's like, I always thought, that just is somewhat not interesting by the end. We don't have any agency beyond that. So for me, the Dennis Beggins thing is like humanity itself, by creating this reality, is somewhat ascending. So if we are ascending, doesn't that give us a bigger game piece on the board in this cosmic game? Like if we are ascending past humanity to where we can create a full reality from nothing, we can create worlds, we can create people and life in this way where it didn't exist before, doesn't that elevate us a little bit going forward in this cosmic
in the
game?
pyramid structure of power, we kind of leveled up a bit. Yeah.
So if Dennis Beggins sees that creation and that reality, doesn't he bow down to maybe the ascendancy of us as a people going forward, that maybe we have a little bit more cachet or sway of what's coming down the road?
And some of that is present in the book about what tools will humans have when they finally do need to go to battle with this thing.
Yeah.
What do they have? We didn't want the Lovecraft response. It was like, absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
Like it's like there's there's a philosophical pondering to that might work really well in a short story, but over a series, like you're going to have some tools to work with, and that was just one of them that we decided on.
At the end of the day, humanity's story is one of a struggle, and trying to find out how we can survive the catastrophe in which we got ourselves in. It's not one of just staying there. It's always trying to find something better, one way to survive or another. And I think that was reflected in there as well, alongside our need to anthropomorphize everything because we even see human expressions in our pets. So yeah, it's a very interesting analysis, I think, in there. And another thing that I wanted to touch in was moving from the grand scheme into the specific characters, how some of the characters, for example, Howard, the media mogul, they seem to have this reluctance to accept that they are no longer powerful, keep doing everything they can to try to scrap more power or, as you said, climb that pyramid of power. Even when, as the readers, we have the perspective and the understanding that humanity's power is pretty much non-existent, especially when we have that sorrow versus chaos at the end. We can see that we are very far behind. Do you think that that's a flaw on the characters, a very human response, something that make us keep going?
I think it's a very human response. I think it's also something particular to Howard. I don't know that everybody would feel the same way as Howard does, but the thing I love about Howard's character is that he has this mysterious backstory that almost makes him go into every situation with the mindset that I will never be powerless again. I refuse to not be at the top of my game with the most power of anybody in this room. And I think that's why the discovery messes with him so much. There's some deep, hateful pit inside of him. He knows that he can't have power over this, but he will drive himself into the ground to find it.
That was that aspect of Cthulhu worship of just like, why would you do it? It's almost kind of like the opposite response that Howard is having. It was just like, I'm going to resist it and climb the human ladder of power as far as I can and control our response as much as possible. But it's obviously useless. But it's still like, I've got to do something.
Yeah.
And that's what he chooses to do.
It's like you said, Livia. I don't think that people are able to, there's an asteroid coming towards Earth, might as well just lie down and wait. I don't know that we're entirely able to do that. Humanity will always find the need to survive or have a last minute hope that at the final hour something will happen.
Specifically about Howard, in the book, I think that you hinted that he was a survivor from a war, that he was a veteran. So when I saw that he was always trying to climb for power, I thought that perhaps you were hinting at some trauma response, like this happened to me, I was used in this way, I will never be powerless again, the minions sent in the ground.
Yeah, we definitely have that kind of hidden aspect that he lost his beloved sister in the Holocaust. The ultimate evil, his family faced it and lost. He got out and reinvented himself and changed his life. And here's this media empire. And he's so detached from that past, but so haunted by it. I was really intrigued with that aspect about why somebody would do that, why a survivor would do that, and what kind of survivor's guilt would occur. And it was just this really complicated response to the unknown and being utterly powerless.
Yeah, I think that if you ask anybody, how will you react to being faced with the unknown? Any response that they will say is probably just a lie. We can't know until it happens,
Absolutely.
Yeah. In this theme, you also have a lot of conflict and struggle. Everything that happens seems to coming from a prior struggle. So you have this here, like the discovery and the whole struggle of everything that happens here, but you also have the struggle of a prior civilization, which was the struggle for them to survive because Sorrow and his race wanted to get them over. So it seems to be a tale of a never-ending conflict. Everything we do has consequences. And at that point, I think that you also brushed in the idea of cosmic horror that leans a bit towards existentialism. Like, why do we keep trying, even if there is conflict and struggle all the way,
Yeah. And I think, for the earthly characters, the mortal characters, I mean, Doss is dealing with trauma in his family line from where he comes from in the world. Every one of these characters is dealing with something that's very personal and very attached to their genetic family line of where they come from. And that was part of, we wanted to show how a world responds as opposed to just a portion of the world. So everyone is very much tied to a cultural, familial background and what that does to them and how they respond. And some of, hopefully, the hope and beauty in that is that they never stop trying to respond. They never stop trying to move on. They never stop trying to heal themselves in relationships or one way or another, because that is what humans do. That is the beauty of humans. So when we get a little bit more into Sister Mary's story and we even go further back into that genetic and familiar line using the world box, where you can go even all the way back, right? I mean, that's to show some of the hopefulness and the beauty of what we have as opposed to having no power at all on a cosmic scale. We do have this power of always trying to overcome, regardless of where you come from and what familiar tragedy or trauma you're dealing with. There is still forward momentum that we always try to overcome.
There is also something that I really like. This I probably was intended on your side, but it wasn't just a discovery of humankind, it was a discovery of every individual character, because we had Oliver with the discovery of his trauma. Also, he's quite hunted on why he can't have a relationship with women in any sense, with a mother, with a daughter, and through the entire storyline, he tries to discover that. Then we have Lucia with feeling weird or being told that she's weird. Each of the storylines have that personal discovery as well. And I think it also ties to human nature, like we're always trying to understand ourselves.
Yeah,
I was going to ask if you wanted to tie that also to the theme of a book.
I think we just loved the idea of not only having all of these different cultures and people from different parts of the world represented, but all different kinds of trauma as well, because trauma can be passed down in generational stories. Like if your grandfather went through something awful that affected his family, that could affect his daughter, your mother, and that could affect you, and now that trauma has been passed down to you in some strange way.
Yeah, like say it's like, don't go near that river ever.
Right. Yeah.
Like those kind of dark warnings that your elders will give you. You'll be like, I wonder why. Don't ask. And then you spend your time in your childhood. It was like, well, what happened to grandpa? My goodness. Those kinds of things about how a generational trauma can be passed down, especially with withholding, with Oliver Doss withholding emotion from the females in his life, to say like there's something there that he's withholding, but there's also, he's trying to tell you that there's a danger. And so many people in the next generation trying to figure out what that is and why that is.
Yeah, I completely completely agree. But the feeling that all of these people across the world having their own sense of trauma that is based on their cultural story. Lucia was left alone as an orphan, and yes, that ties into her heritage and her kind of just being dropped into the ocean. But Oliver's trauma coming from his family in India all the way back then that's now been passed down to him, and his relationship with women stemming from his grandmother and what he saw. Tony's generational trauma with all of the strange deaths that happened in his family through generations and how isolating that can feel. You can't attach yourself to somebody. There's nobody that is assured to be around all the time. And therefore, you're just alone. You have no love that affects you as a person. And to have that representation for each culture, that type of trauma may not be specifically tied to what that culture means, but I think it does affect how they move through their culture, which I think just makes it that more interesting to explore.
I don't know if we ever talked about as a theme of each of the characters would have an interpersonal discovery to dovetail off of the big discovery in the book. But I do know it was important to us that it's like sometimes you'll hear about, oh, science fiction will be about the concepts or about the ideas, and sometimes the characters take a back seat. It was very important for us for these characters to be completely, as much as we could make them realized and three-dimensional and dealing with things from their past and themselves and their culture, not just the concepts of the book, but they would be as much of a real person as they could be. So on that level, I think we were striving to have them have internal, interpersonal epiphanies because it makes them feel real.
And it also, because there is major crisis going on in the world, it doesn't mean that your personal problems stop.
Yeah, exactly.
They go on, sometimes even worse.
Yeah.
Many times,
Which
yeah.
is what happens here, yeah. And also, I wanted to circle back to what Jacob mentioned. I think that also societies have trauma. If you have a war, that will leave a mark in society as a whole. It will be something that everyone in there shares. And I think that you also touched on that a bit when we investigate the different cultures, when we go to Africa as well. Like you can see like the effects are still there, perhaps in some cases exacerbated by the discovery of the sleeping one.
I love that you picked up on that because I'm also fascinated with how cultures handle and recover from their collective trauma, especially war, genocide. I'm just absolutely fascinated with recovery from that, and even intergenerational recovery, where one generation detached would just be completely lost touch with what the original meaning is, but still live with the consequences of that. And those echoes down the generation and the grandchildren feel it. That's just been such an interest of mine. So I'm glad that you can read that in the book.
I thought it was a very interesting point. It's also something that I really enjoy, a theme that I really enjoy writing as well. So that's what I picked up. Is there anything else that you want to share? Any theme specific?
I'm just absolutely pleased that this hit for you, that like we wanted to express in a story. It was able to translate for you and understand what we were getting at and process that. It means so much to me.
Absolutely. Yeah. Phenomenal.
I think that you managed to blend the best of social sci-fi in terms of a society-driven plot with the best elements of a character-driven plot at the same time. To have the personal aspect of it in a cinematic prose, like I said before. So to me, it was a very incredible book.
Well,
Yeah.
that is enormously kind.
Well, I'm done.
Yeah.
Done.
Pinch me, I'm
Okay.
dreaming. That's
Yeah.
a matter. That's
In that case, I have the last and most important question. When do we get book 2?
It's in progress, and we're shooting for the end of 2026 for it to be completed. Now, when that comes to everyone's hands, I'm not sure. The answer I would always probably love to give is as soon as it's absolutely the best that we can make it. Of course, now, like we were toiling in obscurity before, and now people are asking us. I mean, and thank goodness they are, you know,
Oh,
where's
yeah.
book 2? And I'm just
Yeah.
like, well, when it's done, and nobody likes to hear that.
No.
But I do want to say, as soon as it's absolutely the best we can be.
Looking forward to reading it in that case. On that note, thank you so much for joining me in the episode. And will you share any details of where people can find you and Discovery?
Thank you for having us, first of all. It's so great to be here, Livia, and your questions were fantastic, so thank you. We have a website, JAJMinton.com. You can access a free sample there if you want to give it a try. I don't feel like buying it yet, but the book itself is available on Amazon. Discovery by J.A.J. Minton in ebook or a physical paperback.
We also have an option to sign up on our website for news updates on Discovery and other formats. that we are working on. And any news about book 2, make sure that you get that. We would love to have your email to tell you.
And you are also on Talking Story, right?
Oh yeah, we have a booktube channel. Whoops. We have a booktube channel called Talking Story that is all three of us make appearances, but most of the time it is my dad talking about how many hundreds and hundreds of pages he reads per week. And of course, any Discovery news goes up there as well. So if you're looking for Discovery news, Talking Story is also a good place to go.
You will find all those links in the description of the episode. That said, if you liked it, please rate the podcast, like, and subscribe to it. And if you want bite-sized deep dives, prose analysis, and updates on my own writing, please subscribe to my newsletter at liviajelliot.com. As a bonus for subscribing, you will get the free book of my novella titled The Genesis of Change. It is not cosmic horror, but it does feature some overpowered eldritch alchemist and a magic system based on philosophy. I will leave a link to subscribe to my newsletter, as well as all the links that we mentioned on the episode's description. Thanks for listening and happy reading.